Shavua Tov, Hanukkah Sameach, Chodesh Tov. Why is it that the yearly cycle of the Torah readings always puts the stories of Joseph at the time of the Hanukkah festival? What is the connection? How is it that Hanukkah is such a misunderstood, yet perhaps the most popular of all Jewish holidays, and the most popular observance is the lighting of the menorah? And yet, that lighting of the menorah is the result of a miracle that possibly was completely unnecessary. Let's understand this a little better and understand why it is such an amazing fact that so many Jews of all stripes and levels of observance, from the most religious of the religious to the most secular of the secular, still lights a Hanukkah menorah. And if they would be aware of what they were doing, they might not have chosen such a ritual, but they do it anyway. And why is that such a fantastic and sublime thing? The source for the holiday of Hanukkah is the Talmud in Shabbos, Masechet Shabbat, which talks about the laws of Shabbos. And since candles are part of Shabbos, they're also brought up in the context of Hanukkah. The Talmud says, what is Hanukkah? When the Greeks came into the temple, they defiled or created a status of tum'ah, which is ritual impurity, for all of the oils that they found that were used to light the menorah, the holy, pure menorah in the temple. And when the Jews, the Maccabees, reconquered the temple a year later, or whenever it was, they came in and they found only one jug of oil that still had the seal of the high priest intact, indicating it had not been defiled by the Greeks. And so there was only oil in that jug to last one day. They lit it, but it lasted 8 whole days, a miracle. And so therefore they made a holiday the next year about that miracle. Great. The question is, it was an unnecessary miracle, because Jewish law says that if most of the congregation, most of the people of Israel are in a status of tumah, of impurity, they are allowed to bring sacrifices in that status. So they wouldn't have needed to use pure oil to light the menorah. They could have used the impure oils that they found, and it would have been fine. So this entire miracle was unnecessary, and thus I ask many rabbis. And, well, the most simple answer is simply that, yes, they could have they could have lit impure oils, but they found this one jug, which still had the high priest's seal, which hadn't been defiled, and so they said, well, let's light that one first. They lit it first. That makes sense. And guess what? It didn't go out. It kept going for 8 days, which was the time required to bring new pure oil to continue the commandment of lighting the menorah. And the people at the time, the rabbis at the time, saw in this a sign of approval from God that they had done well to fight those wars against the Greeks, because those wars were not just against the Greeks, my friends, they were also against their fellow Jews. There were 2 groups, the Yevanim, which are the Greeks, and the Mityavnim, which means those who had become Greek. Many Jews had been seduced by the Hellenistic culture, and let us understand that the Hellenistic culture was very, very attractive. It was all about beauty, about aesthetics, about power. They built grand structures, gymnasiums, stadiums, theaters, you name it. And they worshipped the beauty of the human body. So it was a very, very seductive and attractive culture. And the entire world was following. Everybody was doing it. So if everybody's doing it, it's hard to be just a few who stand up and say no. So there was a civil war between those Jews, those zealous Jews who wanted to restore the purity of the temple worship and to maintain the Jewish faith and to reject the Hellenism of the age, against many Jews who joined together with the Greeks, saying this is the wave of the future. And it could be that the rabbi said that, well, it's very valuable to preserve the temple and Judaism, of course, but maybe there is something to be concerned about. Maybe there is guilt involved in having a civil war nonetheless. And so they interpreted this miracle that the oil lasted for 8 days when it should have only gone 1 day, as a sign from heaven that indeed God approved of what the Maccabees had done, and therefore the next year, after deliberating and considering, they decided, yes, we're going to make this a holiday. Well, that's one explanation. I have another explanation as well, and that is that the Greeks didn't defile the oil in any of the ritual manners that the Torah talks about. There's tumat met, there is tumat sheretz, there is defilement from a dead body or from a dead reptile, and other types of lesser types of impurity. I don't think that the Greeks walked into the temple and said, "Hey, look at all that oil. Let's make it tamei. Let's defile it. Let's go get some dead bodies and touch the oil with those bodies. Let's do it." I don't think so that the Jews can't bring light their menorah. I don't think the Greeks did that. I'll tell you what I think the Greeks did do. They came to the temple. They put up some idols because they were idolatrous. They were pagan. They had Greek gods and they had a pantheon. They worshipped these things. They put up statues to symbolize them. And since they were putting idol worship in the temple, let's use, said the Greeks, these oils and dedicate them to the idolatry and light them in front of our statues. So in other words, the impurity that we're referring to is not ritual impurity, it's impurity brought about through idolatry. And the halacha is clear that things, items, oils that are dedicated to an idol, that are used for idolatrous purposes, become forbidden to be used for Jewish ritual purposes, and therefore it would be not appropriate and not acceptable to use oil that had been dedicated to the Greek gods, to Zeus or whatever, to use that on the pure menorah in the temple in the service of God. So that would explain why finding a jug of oil with the Kohen Gadol, with the high priest's seal, would indicate that that jug had not been opened by the Greeks and therefore had not been dedicated to idolatry, and therefore it was acceptable to be used for the menorah, and that was the miracle. From all of these things, we see a social situation which was quite remarkable, that the majority of the Jewish people and the world had become Hellenized. And this culture was very seductive and attractive, and Jews were feeling that if they continued to keep their rituals, it's out of touch, it's out of step, and they will miss out on all of the fun, if you will, of being part of that Hellenistic way of life. But a few Jews, very brave and very strong, said, "We're not having any of it. We are few, and we will defeat the many because our light is a light of spirituality. It's an entirely different way of taking in the world. Hellenism says, enjoy life, enjoy the aesthetics of life. Judaism says, enjoy a spiritual life where you are constantly building towards an ever greater and ever more holy future." And that's a very different approach. Now, if you would ask the average, let's say, non-observant or somewhat assimilated Jew who lights the menorah, "Why are you doing this?" They will tell you, "I'm doing it because I'm Jewish, and because there's this story about the oil from one day which lasted 8 days, and it was a miracle." And that's correct. That's, as we have seen, that's accurate. But then they often will go on and start saying things that are complete nonsense. Pardon me. Things that it's about freedom, and it's about warmth, and it's about justice, and it's about light over darkness, and all of that stuff. What is the light? What is darkness? It doesn't mean anything. It's really meaningless, and a lot of it is nonsense. It sounds nice, and some of these things are very important. Certainly freedom is important. Certainly justice and warmth and light are all important things, but they're not Hanukkah. This light was about purifying the temple in Jerusalem and restoring Jewish belief and Jewish practice. Now you'll ask the same people, what do you think about the Jews rebuilding a Jewish temple in Jerusalem, building an altar and bringing sacrifices on it? Do you approve? I am willing to bet money that most people would say, "Oh my goodness, no, how primitive, no way, that's not where we're at today. Cruelty to animals," whatever you want to throw in there. They would be horrified by it. Tell me, did you sing Ma'oz Tzur? Sure. Do you know what that song says? It says, "Tikon Beit Tfilati," may the house of my prayers be established. That's referring to the temple at Jerusalem, which was the center of the Hanukkah story. V'sham Todah Nizabeach, and there we will bring a thanksgiving offering. Sorry, that's an animal sacrifice, not a lollipop, right? And then we say, "Azeg Mor Bashir Mizbor Chanukata Mizbeach." I will conclude with a song about the rededication of the altar. They weren't using that altar for tap dancing. It was for sacrifices. And people are singing this. They have no idea. They have no idea what the essence of Hanukkah is. It is the victory of tradition, of Judaism, of the Torah, over the prevailing culture, and so many people are trying to take Hanukkah and make it part of the prevailing culture. But I believe there is great holiness in this nonetheless. You see, on a side, it gives so many Jews a tremendous merit. What is that? The rabbis in the Talmud, they say that when a person finishes their life after 120 years, they go up to the divine justice, and they're asked a few questions. And one of the questions they're asked is, Tzipita liyeshua, did you look forward to the redemption? And so now everybody can say, yes, I sang Ma'oz Tzor. And in Ma'oz Tzor I said, Tikon beit tfilati v'sham todah nizabeach. May the temple be rebuilt and I will bring a thanksgiving offering. Yes, I was looking forward to the redemption. So it's a great merit. Well, I believe that there is conscious and subconscious here. You see, conscious, a person who is especially coming from a very secular background, would never approve or agree with some of the things that we've talked about, that the Jews should build a temple and there should be sacrifices, and that it's all about observance when they themselves don't feel that Jews should be observing a lot of these rituals. They're outdated according to them, and other, nonsensical things and beliefs that the assimilated Jew has adopted, which is basically the same as what happened back then when the Jews had become Hellenized. But nonetheless, they still like this, and I believe that that's because on the subconscious level, because inside, where the neshama, in the heart, and the soul of the person, there is a Jewish flame burning. And we may not be consciously aware of it, but it is there, and it pushes us to act in ways that say, I am a Jew. And at the end of the day, that is who I am, that's my identity. And I may not have the vocabulary to express it through observing of the commandments and all of that. Still, that's in there, and it's just waiting for its opportunity. And I believe that that flame was the flame that was lit by those Maccabees. Not only did it burn for 8 days, it is still burning in the hearts, in the souls of Jews all over the world. And perhaps this is the modern miracle of Hanukkah, that so many people observe it. And they don't know why, but there is a deep, deep, holy reason that even we ourselves are not aware of. And that brings me to Joseph. Now, Joseph was in Egypt. He was a Hanukkah candle. What do I mean? He was also surrounded by an entirely alien culture. He was sold by his brothers, therefore he had no connection to his family whatsoever. He could have done whatever he wanted, and he was a respected slave in the house of Potiphar, whose beautiful wife wanted him, and there was nobody there in the house, and he could have done what he wanted to. But that wasn't Joseph. Ani Yosef et Elokim ani yareh. I am Joseph, I fear the Lord. And then he gets thrown into a prison. Goodness gracious. The rabbis say that a person should have a good neighbor and a good friend to be a positive influence. Not only did Joseph not have a good neighbor and a good friend in Egypt, he had bad neighbors and bad friends. He was in a prison with criminals, thieves, other types of people who society felt can't be kept among us and have to be put away in a special place. Joseph was in a dungeon. Maybe there he could have let go a little bit. No, he still serves God. He helps. He interprets dreams. I am Joseph. I fear the Lord. And then he gets elevated to be the second to Pharaoh himself. Nobody's going to tell him what he can do, what he can't do. He can demand whatever he wishes. He could become, and Pharaoh gives him an Egyptian name, which we hear exactly once, Tzafnat Paneach. He's never called that, but Pharaoh gives him that name. He's entirely Egyptian, Joseph, so you can behave like the Egyptians do. And Egypt was a fairly depraved society. No, I am Joseph, I fear the Lord. How did he do that? How was he a Hanukkah candle standing up against the entire world that was so seductive and so attractive? What was his power? Well, we talked about it last week. I quote the book of Stephen Covey, who describes that there are 3 circles that a person can spend their time and energy focused on. The innermost circle is the circle of control. These are the things that I control, my speech, my behavior, and so forth. Then beyond that is the circle of influence. This is where I don't control, but I can influence other people in certain directions. They're still free to choose otherwise, but I have importance and they listen to me. And then the third one is the dangerous one. This is the circle of interest. This is where people can neither control nor influence what happens, but they spend a lot of time, sometimes all of our time, in the circle of interest. This is people who are news junkies and spend the whole day reading the paper or reading the internet or reading the Facebook or whatever else it's going to be, and whatever Facebook is now called. So all of these distractions, the result of them is they determine where our influence is headed. Is it headed out from us, or is it coming into us? If we're in the circle of interest, so then that outside world then influences us, and our circle of influence gets smaller and smaller as we become passive, as we become changed by society. But if we live in the inner circle of control, then the opposite process happens. Then the more I control my actions, the more I can then influence others, and my circle of influence grows until I can even change the world, as happened with Joseph. He was always in his circle of control, and he was influencing those around him, whether it be in Potiphar's house or in the jail, or as assistant to Pharaoh, where he changed the entire society. Almost got the whole country to become Jewish, but that's for another time. At any rate, that is how Joseph was able to be a Hanukkah candle, by staying in his circle of control. And that is where we need to put our focus, our control and our influence. Not let the outside world, not let the Hellenistic culture that may prevail then or now, which is so seductive and so attractive, and we all want to belong. But sometimes we have to stand up and say, you know what, we don't belong. This particular jug of oil has the Kohen Gadol's seal on it. And if we light that candle, it's going to burn not just for 8 days, but for thousands of years in our hearts. And the more we control that flame, the more we allow that flame to burn, the more light, the more spirituality our world will gain. Hanukkah Sameach.